So we're here today to discuss the work of the Bioregional Advisory Panel and the Expert Scientific Panel on the review of the Commonwealth marine reserves. Colin, can you explain what was involved? It was a fairly lengthy consultation process with a lot of different stakeholders, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And against our terms of reference, we had to go out and consult with stakeholders across the whole spectrum, people from the conservation sector, fishing sector, mining sector, oil and gas. We spoke to people right around the country, trying to identify the problems that they had with the original proclamation and trying to isolate specific issues that we could address through our terms of reference.
And did many of them have a problem with that first, the first?
Yes, they did. I mean,
yes.
Absolutely. We were probably quite surprised at how many people were dissatisfied with the outcome and wanted to see improvements and had very strong expectations that we could make a difference. And happily we can say that, at the end of the process, we think that we've come up with a really good balance.
So people welcomed the opportunity to have their say some more?
They certainly did. That was a very strong message that we got through the whole consultation process. They not only welcomed the opportunity to talk to us individually, but they really welcomed the opportunity to talk to us in the presence of others. So we had multi-sector stakeholder consultation that really proved to be great, where they were able to hear the point of view of the other point of view and discuss it in a constructive and sensible way.
And Peter, is that something that people don't normally have, and that's to hear the other side of I guess, the argument or the story?
That was one of the feedback items we got, was that the multi-sector stakeholder forums were really valued by all the stakeholders, to hear and be able to respond to the views of others. The previous process had more focused on a sector-by-sector consultation and negotiation, and therefore one of the issues with the previous proclamation process was that there were some surprises at the end, because things had been negotiated sector by sector. And so the process we had, where more was on the table and more open for discussion between stakeholders, was regarded well.
So are you anticipating then that this might be more well received and it might be more of a final outcome?
Well, we hope so, given the amount of work we've put into it and the amount of work that the stakeholders put into talking to us, providing thousands of submissions. And when we went back to talk to a number of them, they engaged very deeply with us on the proposals that we had.
And Bob, there was a lot of scientific review, very extensive report that you've come up with. How did you find the stakeholders? Were they engaged in that as well, and were they interested in the science of it all?
The way the review was set up, the stakeholder consultations were handled by Peter and Colin, and the role of the expert scientific panel was to review the available science. That included consulting with members of the scientific community, which we did. So it was looking back at the process that had been used up to 2012 and then looking forward at the information that has subsequently become available.
And from your report, it seemed that there was a lot of new information.
There was a fair bit in some areas, but the thing that really I think was new and innovative about the review was that there was interaction, because Peter and Colin were on the expert scientific panel, and they were picking up scientific questions that they'd wanted resolved by the panel. So they were coming back to us, we were working on them, and then providing them with findings that they could feed back into the consultation process. So it was informed both by the interactions between the stakeholders and by information that was coming back from the science.
And Colin, did you find that there was a lot of scientific questions you were getting, and so it was good to have a whole panel to deal with them?
Yes, there were several what we called references to the expert science panel. We were able to crystallise information that we were getting and feedback that we were getting from the stakeholders, identifying an issue that needed a specific answer to, and so that toing and froing between the expert science panel and the Bioregional Advisory Panel worked really well.
And Peter, how hard was it to get some consensus? There's a lot of different stakeholders involved. We've got Indigenous owners, we've got mining and oil interests, there's fishing interests, there's tourism operators. How do you get all those people to agree to sort of the same thing?
Well, I think we were very happy to find that there were a number of cases where we got agreement across the board for the proposals that we had, but that wasn't possible in all circumstances. There are a few cases where some of the stakeholders offered to go away and try to negotiate amongst themselves to find a better result and couldn't, came back and said no, the outcome that was negotiated in 2012 was as good as it could get. So we had that spectrum from couldn't get any better to some quite substantial changes that were widely accepted.
What are the main things then that have changed from the previous proclamation to what you've recommended?
The initial proclamation was a fairly broad brush approach. So within the network, we were able to isolate particular problems and find solutions that didn't necessarily compromise on the one hand, conservation outcome, or on the other hand, the socio-economic outcome. And people sort of would ask, how could you get a good conservation outcome as well as a good fishing outcome? And it wasn't that difficult to do that. By focusing on the detail, we were as we've said before, we were able to balance often competing interests and find a workable solution for both parties. And so we believe we have ended up with a better conservation outcome and one that has a lesser socio-economic cost.
What about...
And can I just add one thing to that? Is also the system, the whole purpose of this is to identify and protect a representative sample of Australia's marine ecosystems. And I think one of the important outcomes that we've delivered through our work has made it more representative. So we've got a much better representation of conservation features, the important features that have been identified for protection in no-take areas, so receiving the highest level of protection. There are more of those conservation features in no-take zones as a result of the work that we've done. And as Colin says, at lower socioeconomic cost.
And just picking up on going forward, the terms of reference very clearly wanted a science, evidence-based approach to management to be put in place. And that was strongly in the terms of reference, and I believe that we've been able to point the way towards doing that.
What sort of time frame do you see before another review would need to be done?
The key tool for managing the reserves is the management plan, and the management plans have a lifetime of up to 10 years. It's reasonable to expect that to be 10 years. And a management plan can change the zoning of a park and reserve. And so there is flexibility when new management plans are produced to revisit the zoning. Now that usually doesn't change very much, but that potential exists every time a new management plan is produced. And part of the broad structure of management plans is to monitor what goes on in the reserves and to build the information base to examine whether the current zoning is the best possible one and is it achieving its outcomes. And if it's not, then you've got the flexibility to change and adapt.
And Bob,
that approach has been endorsed in the report. And there's quite a lot of detail about how it might be gone about. And the other thing we've done is said that the various scientific endeavours that both the Commonwealth and the states conduct within these system, even adjacent to the system, should be better integrated and better brought together so that our knowledge base is the best possible knowledge base for the limited amount of money we've got to spend on it.
Now, is there any one group of stakeholders who you think once they see the final product might be, less enthusiastic than others? Might it be the, say, recreational fishers if they're not going to be allowed to go to certain areas?
I think it's my strong expectation that all stakeholders will see what we've done, they'll understand why we've done it, and they will see that across the board everyone is better off.
Obviously, there's a range of political views about anything to do with conservation and industry. And I know that that's not your particular job to, engage in that discussion, but what do you do when people use their emotive argument when you've come up with such a thorough report? What do you do? Just keep going back to the report and saying, please read what we did?
We heard a lot of passion and emotion from many quarters. People are passionate about conservation of the oceans and what's in it. People whose livelihoods were strongly affected by the zoning, for example. People whose entire business, in some cases, took place in Commonwealth reserves. So we heard all of that and listened very carefully to that, and that weighed on us as we made our decisions. Absolutely, but as Bob has said, we looked at the science, we looked at the values, we looked at what people thought was important, and then we've made our best judgment as to how that balance should be, a better balance could be struck.
This was an extensive consultation process. How many submissions did you receive from stakeholders? And, what did you do with those submissions? And how many different meetings did you have? I know you had 5 different panel arrangements, so if you can explain the process from that point of view.
Our consultation involved 3 major arms, if you like: an online survey, for which we got about 1,800 submissions on. We opened the opportunity for people to provide written submissions, and we received over 13,000 written submissions to us. And then we held over 260 meetings around the country where we met hundreds of stakeholders, some of which were one-on-ones and some of which were multi-stakeholders and some of which were sector-based. So we feel we've thoroughly canvassed the range of views that people wanted to put to us, and we made every effort to make sure people could talk to us if they wanted to. Some people several times.
Yeah. And of course we took account of the almost decade of consultation and submissions that had gone before the review, and we listened to those points of view as well.